Thank you for joining us. I'm Paul Wilson.
And I'm Chris Ehmke.
And this is Diesel Performance Podcast. Guys, we got a great episode today. Chris and I and Justin, producer Justin, traveled. We are live on site with Auto Meter. We have Mike and Marc. Mike, how the hell are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us. It's a pleasure to have you guys here. We're excited to talk with you guys.
Absolutely. It's been a blast. Marc, how about you? How are you doing today?
Very, very good. Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for being here. Hope you enjoyed the tour that you had of the plant.
Yeah, the plant. Chris, what'd you think about walking through the factory?
Very neat. I would say, everything has a place, to say the least. Very organized. I think one of the things that I want to dive into, maybe not right this minute, but it was the QC process. I think was something that I'm still in awe about. So,
do you know? So I know Auto Meter personally as the pillar gauges. That like when I think of Auto Meter, I think of like the first getting into like an 0659 Cummins with 3 pillar gauges and bumping my head on them as I get in. And the damn thing is I always think of them working.
I think, we are spoiled in what we do because there's a lot of electronic gauges that plug into the OBD and they are able to do the things that sometimes mechanical gauges are kind of looked past. My background, right? The older mechanical trucks, 12 valve, 24 valve Cummins, the 7.3 trucks, where you don't necessarily have as much luxury of plugging into an OBD port. So I always thought of Auto Meter as kind of like that rugged, aggressive, you're going to have a lot of money tied up into your truck. You're going to want to run specific gauges to monitor those engine vitals and not necessarily rely on the electronic side of things. At least
an insurance policy
in the older stuff. So.
That's right, Mike. I like saying that. It's an insurance policy. Can you tell us a little bit? So Chris and I obviously had a very limited understanding of what Auto Meter was doing over here. After walking through the manufacturing operation, we saw a whole lot more that I didn't know existed. Can you give us a little bit of your background at Auto Meter and what are some of the best kept secrets?
Sure. So yeah, my background, I started here 20 years ago. I actually started in high school of all things. So I did a co-op program. So if I wasn't in school, I came here and worked a few hours and kind of wrapped up my day here. I was fortunate enough to be a part of the internship program. So I was a student at Northern Illinois. And so through my 4 years, basically same concept. When I wasn't in class, I was here at work. And in the summers, I would, work full time. So through that process and then graduated in 2007, was lucky enough kind of in the downturn of the economy that I actually landed a job here and basically just kind of been here ever since. So I've kind of done various things from, I started taking out the trash, like no joke. I know everyone likes to use that as a cliche, but that's legitimately what I did, and then did technical support and then moved into sales. And now I'm director of instrumentation sales here at Auto Meter. So it's turned into a career for me for sure. Kind of the best kept secrets, we were having a little bit of a sidebar before, we started the interview. And I feel like kind of the best kept secret is you don't know until you actually come through and experience the whole thing. We can sit here and talk about, how we manufacture things in the United States and, we employ a whole bunch of people, and you guys mentioned the quality control. Those are all great things, but really until you actually get into the process and see how it's all done, it's all very efficient. There's a lot of efficiency to it also. This person starts in this position, does, whatever they do to the gauge, get the internals in there and kind of moves it along to the next position. It's all timed. It's all, we've gone through many different processes to make sure that what we're doing every step of the way, from where you reach your arm to grab the box to, how you push the pointer onto the dial. All that stuff is all, a process that we went through to make sure that, we're able to build things accurately and quickly and effectively. Really, that's what it comes down to. And I think until you actually get a chance like you guys got to do the tour, you don't appreciate it as much.
One of the things our tour guide, Dean, was explaining to us, you have you have an area called a taco. Okay. And those gauges, I was told years back, a good day, 60, 70 gauges could be made. And now you could pump out over 360 gauges a day from being more efficient in the operation.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, we went through different processes like 5-star and Six Sigma, all those kind of, MBA buzzwords that you've heard tossed around through the years. And we did that. I mean, when we were first acquired by an investment group in the early 2000s, that was, something that they looked at as, how do we maintain manufacturing parts here in the States and, keep the jobs and keep things efficient. So, I mean, literally every line, you mentioned the taco line. I did I believe it was like a Six Sigma type thing, or lean marketing, or lean manufacturing. And, we grab people from different departments, somebody from sales, somebody from marketing, somebody from engineering, somebody from the line, accounting even. You grab all these different people, and then you go through this whole sequence of events of, okay, what are all the steps involved? And the one I did was mechanical speedos. So we talked about, okay, what's the first thing that you do? Okay, and then the second and third, and you kind of go through the whole process, and you're like, okay, how can I shave 2 seconds here and 5 seconds here? And, once you get to the ultimate, to the end, if you're saving 15, 20, 30 seconds on one part, then that just allows you to build more and more units, and ultimately allowed us to maintain employing people here and going through that whole process to make things much more efficient.
That is such a cool story, because I do love that it stayed in the U.S. throughout all the manufacturing and all of the employees that are here that still work in manufacturing. Now, Marc, you're here with us as well. Can you give us a little bit about your background with Auto Meter?
Sure. I actually am the senior member to Mike, just to let you know. I was here for like 2 months before he was. So July will be my 21st anniversary, which I'm very proud of, that I've been at Auto Meter, and they've allowed me to be employed here. I grew up, my dad was a drag racer. When I was born, there was a race car in the garage. Unfortunately, he gave me that disease, and I drag race, got into cars, have that disease. And as Mike was saying, it's pretty interesting for when Mike and I started, the processes that we had to build the gauge and the gauges that we had at that time. When I first started, the biggest complaint that we received, by the way, I did the same thing, Mike. I started in tech. I went into, back then it was pre-sales, then went back to tech, and now I'm a sales/tech guy. I still answer the phone, talk to customers, which is a great way to communicate as far as, hey, which way is the market moving, so on and so forth. It's great to talk to the end user. That's very important to our business, is to be able to communicate with the end user to find out exactly what they want, or, any type of problems that are arising on their vehicle. So it's something that we can manufacture a gauge for, or something like that. But back in the day when we first started, people complained about our gauges were way too dim. That was when we had the incandescent bulbs, the ultralights, the sport comps, so, hey, how do I brighten your gauges up, to when we came out with the through-the-dial LED gauges, which we physically now have to build a dimmer for, because people now call and complain that the gauges are way too bright for them. So it's been a long way for what we have seen as far as the technology in the gauges. I mean, it was simple. When him and I started, it was literally a mechanical gauge, and then you could have a separate warning light with a switch on it, to now where we build gauges that's all wrapped into one. We make gauges that now have 7 different illumination colors, user-definable warning lights. We have a Pro Control option, where if you take a water temperature gauge and it gets to a certain degree, it'll supply ground to a relay and turn on a fan. So just in the 20 years that I have been here and Mike has been here, just to see the technology of how far we've come with our products is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that's only touching on the analog stuff. I mean, we start dabbling into, talking about digital stuff, and we brought in the display for you guys to check out here. I know that the listeners won't be able to see it, but our Envision dashes really are, kind of the next wave of where we're headed.
And that was one of the things, again, when Dean was showing us around and giving us a tour, we had brought up to him, like, hey, what about the digital stuff? And he's like, oh, I'm so glad you asked. So you guys have a digital dash that essentially plugs into some of the older model vehicles as a plug and play, but also analog, so you could wire it in manually. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if we're talking about Envision specifically, so it's basically a dedicated dash. So it's got tack, speed, fuel, oil, water, and volts, and we include a wire harness and a water and an oil sender. So you can add it to any vehicle. If you have a 12-volt battery and you can get those senders onto the block, like literally it'll work on anything. I mean, it's very, very adaptable. Now, you were talking about the ability to tie into existing sensors. You can also do that too with what we have called as a CAN bridge. And basically what that does is it plugs in the diagnostic port on your OBD2, and then it grabs whatever signal data is available there, goes to the little module box. That box converts that, into a signal that either a gauge could read or a single CAN plug in to drive like an Envision dash. So you're able to utilize, all the sensors and things that are already there instead of having to run, redundant sending units for the 6 instruments that I mentioned.
It's so wild to me when I think about digital dashes and what that looks like, is we're starting to see swaps become more and more prevalent, especially in the diesel community. I do wonder, looking at the digital dash and then looking at all of the dial gauges, what's more popular? What are you guys seeing customer demand for?
Well, there's definitely a transition happening. I'll say that. So, the round kind of traditional instruments, that's always going to be our bread and butter. I mean, that's what we're known for. I think anybody who, look at our logo. I mean, it's a tachometer. I mean, that's still who we are and what we'll always be. But definitely the digital stuff, the Envision dashes especially, are becoming more and more and more popular. And with, vehicle specific options that we have primarily in the muscle car market. But for the diesel enthusiasts, we have the universal one that we do, and that can be adapted to anything. I mean, like I said before, as long as you have a 12-volt battery, you can drive that display, and then it's just a matter of putting the sending units on the block and wiring power and ground to it. And then, you've got a full, system available to you.
Well, I think I'm showing my age on this because I grew up when the OEMs and everything actually used analog gauges in their vehicles. Now, so you have the younger crowd coming up that's used to, in the vehicles, they're used to like an LCD screen or, a tablet or their phones or stuff. They're actually used to that type of, something that looks similar to that. So I think that's where it's going. Also, I think for me, the fabrication of it, it's much similar to be able to cut one hole than it is to do multiple holes for gauges and such. And I honestly think, as Mike touched on before, we have been producing a lot more what we call direct fit products to be able to say to somebody, all right, you have this vehicle, we have a dash for this vehicle, so you're actually able to just to pull your dash out, put this dash in it, instead of having to go, all right, I need to cut a piece of sheet metal into this shape and put holes in it and stuff. And I really think that's really enhanced our business for people to be able to do that, because they don't have to fabricate anything. It's literally, all right, I can pull this out, put this in, and I'm ready to go.
And that would modernize the muscle car era of vehicles that, we were looking at the dashes and the cutaways that you have. Now, one of the things that we touched on was, evolution and things changing, the tides changing, things like that. I know, like, for what Paul and I do in our 9 to 5, it's diesel oriented, right? And there's a lot of companies on the market that offer plug-in gauge displays that will go into your OBD2 and communicate with the factory ECM, and you can pull fuel pressure, even some of the trucks, exhaust gas temps, boost pressure, vane position, all these things. Is that something that Auto Meter has looked at or wanted to potentially investigate, offering something not just in the diesel side, but across all the automotive platforms?
Yeah, we kind of already are in that space a little bit. I mean, maybe not the same way that some of our other companies in the industry are. We don't have like a dedicated display, but what we do have is our DashLink product. And basically that plugs into a diagnostic port, and that's going to give you access to, anything that's on the CAN bus. You can do, monitor fuel economy. You mentioned the fuel pressure. If there's a fuel pressure sender there, you can monitor that. You can set up a full gauge of, virtual gauges on a tablet or on your smartphone. So basically you plug this device into your OBD2 port, and then it's going to use Bluetooth to communicate to your smart device. So that could be your tablet, your smartphone, Apple, Android. It really doesn't matter. You can, put it on one vehicle today, another vehicle the next day, Apple device today, Android tomorrow. It's very adaptable. Basically, it just pairs to the device, and then obviously it's monitoring whatever it's currently plugged into.
Yeah, I honestly had not come across that yet. So that's awesome to hear, because I think that is one of those key elements of what we see a lot of people, like Chris said, in our day-to-day of what people are generally looking for. What I do love, though, is that there's still being attention paid to some of the old classics. Like you guys are talking about the muscle cars, but I'm also thinking about the older trucks that we deal with. Where like, hey, a guy with a 12 valve is never going digital. We'll be lucky for that guy to not have a flip phone in his pocket. You know what I mean? So paying attention to those classics and keeping those guys active and coming around. Is that what you see? Do you guys think you have more customers that are pre-2000 vehicles or post-2000 vehicles?
I think it's definitely pre for being on the tech side and talking to the end users. And I think the big thing that I talk to a lot of people about is you have a lot of people that are taking older trucks and putting diesels in them. I get a lot of calls on the Envision, and they'll be asking, okay, I put a Cummins in my 77 C10, how do I want to use the Envision? How do I make the tack work on this? Which we make a tack adapter, a diesel tack adapter that runs off the alternator to be able to drive something like that. So I think that's something that you're going to see, and we've been developing stuff for older Fords and stuff like that, because I think now the people are seeing it as, maybe I can't afford to go out and buy a 69 Camaro that even in rough shape is going to cost me $30,000, but I can go out and buy a mid-70s Ford or something like that where the initial investment is not going to be so much, and then I can actually take some of my funds that I have to use to upgrade that particular vehicle to get it run. But yeah, the diesel swaps into, and I don't want to, interesting vehicles, the newer diesels into older vehicles, I think is becoming more and more popular.
Yeah, absolutely. I know at the shop we have a couple of swaps that are. It's funny because 10 years ago, if you would have asked me about doing any sort of diesel swap, I would have said that wiring's a nightmare and having any sort of monitoring over it's a joke. But it's great. You guys are starting to address that type of stuff. Do you think your products are mostly focused around somebody who is drag racing, like high-end automotive race car performance, or are you guys seeing like a lot of daily drivers and things of that nature?
I feel like it's a mix.
So do I.
It depends on the product line we're talking about. I mean, we have many brands that are kind of under the umbrella. So like our Deed and Bear brand, starting line controllers and things of that nature, obviously is a drag race product. But when you start talking about something like Envision, that's probably more of a street performance type product. Could you use it in racing? Sure. I think there probably are people that do that. But yeah, it's more specific to each like product that we offer, like whether it's stack is more racing, Auto Meter can be racing, it can be street, it can even be fuel economy monitoring stuff. So, whatever category you want to put that into. So yeah, we really dabble in all segments, honestly. And it's more, what product type are we talking about? And, then we can kind of answer, kind of where, what market it fits into. But yeah, I think we're probably maybe a little bit more street than racing, but certainly we came up through racing, and that was, what made us what we are today was Jeep, who was, Mark's and my boss years ago. And literally he would go to drag races with a tack in a box, where, no joke, I mean, he had a shaggin' wagon that he drove around in, like the carpet, all over the interior of the van. Like, I mean, it's exactly what you'd picture out of the 70s. But he'd go to these races and he'd show people our electronic tack. I mean, everybody was using mechanical tachometers at that time. So electric tacks were the new technology that nobody was aware of. But when he brought that tack out and showed it directly compared against the mechanical and showed how well it worked, that's really what got us started. So. Yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the big things that we have, too, is the diversity that we have at Auto Meter, because we literally have gauges that are made for daily drivers, and then we have gauges like our spec line and our elite gauges that, NASCAR uses and stuff like that. So you have everything from your normal daily driver that we offer stuff for all the way up to the most high-performance vehicle.
Well, in those spec, we even do in diesel kits.
Correct.
So you could put it on your NASCAR vehicle. You could put it on a diesel truck. You could put it on a tuner Subaru. Whatever you want. I mean, the gauge doesn't know what it's being used on. Right. It's a matter of that feature set matches what that consumer is looking for. It could be the color changing. It could be the warning outputs. It could be the Pro Control. I mean, there's all sorts of different reasons why people buy certain parts within our organization.
And then above the Envision dash that we have, we also make we call it a race dash, which is an actual fully programmable LCD dash that has 8 gigabytes worth of memory that will allow you to record all of the channels that you're monitoring and download it to a computer to look at everything. So we literally go from a short sweep mechanical gauge all the way up to a unit that is fully programmable that will record 1,000 samples a second that you can download to a PC. So I mean, it's a vast, wide range of products that we offer.
Now, one of the things you mentioned on earlier was the early era 10, 15 years ago, not having an LED bulb, right, in the mechanical gauge. I remember 12, 13 years ago, there would be a gauge called Glow Shift. I'm sure you guys are familiar. And their claim to fame was it would change colors, right? And a lot of guys would go for that, but the gauges would always fail. Like I always had nothing but issues. Many, many moons ago. Nowadays, you guys said that you have LED bulbs and you have the ability to change, the color or the background of that. What was some of that integration like going from that old style gauge display into that newer style design and that integration of change?
So the funny part about it is, I'll never forget this. We were working with NASCAR and we had just come out with our Cobalt and C2 gauges. So the Cobalt is a blue illumination through, with a red pointer, and then the lights illuminate. So we would take the Cobalt gauge, and the first thing we ever did is we had a little cart, and we would put red lights in the Cobalt gauge, and we would wheel them outside and be like, all right, can you see the red lights in the Cobalt gauge during the day? Because we were trying to figure out how we could make a circuit board that would change colors, that we could design where it would change colors at a certain parameter. And that's how we started kind of stepping each step through that, and just kind of went, all right, let's take this light over here. You're literally looking at an old NASCAR dash that has a oil pressure gauge, and then in the left-hand corner there would be a light, and they're like, all right, now that we have the technology, how can we combine these? And because they are all electronics, that's another thing that we should touch on, is the sending units that we use and the producers of the sending units, their accuracy got so much better. It advanced so quickly of how accurate the electronic gauges got. And then we went to our full sweep stepper motor gauges, and that's the technology that allowed us to be able to say, all right, we can actually put parameters in here to be able to set. We have the accuracy. The stepper motor gauges that we offer, the most accurate gauges we offer, they're even more accurate than the mechanical gauges. So now we have the accuracy. We have the footprint that we can use to be able to put all of this technology inside the gauge and put buttons on it, and that's kind of where it progressed from there. But it was very rudimentary at the beginning. All right, let's put red lights in that gauge and take it outside and power it up and see if we can see it.
It was a lot of reviews. That's what I remember. It was, okay, here's this gauge with, and we have different meter movements. So you've got short sweep electric, you've got mechanical, you've got full sweep electric, and the size of those movements are different. So, one, you may need to put 3 LEDs in. One, you may need to put 5. One's going to be in this orientation. So we had to go through a lot of different steps of making sure that it's consistent. You guys talked about the QC part earlier. That's a big part of, when we did that development, was making sure that when you put, these different gauges next to each other, that they still, look consistent from one to the next, whether it's the intensity of the lighting, the tint of the blue or what have you. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And especially when you start getting to like different colored LEDs, like you'd be surprised. A white LED, like you'd probably think, oh, just a white LED, white's white, right? No, not at all. I mean, you can get one batch from the same one, the supplier A, and then the next time you get that batch from supplier A, it can be a different tint. It might look a little bit pinkish, maybe it's a brighter white. I mean, there's a lot that goes into making sure that things look consistent, whether it's all being built at the same time, or if you build something today that you want to make sure that 2 weeks from now that is still looks the same way. So we have a lot of different mechanisms that we do, whether it's looking at a board that's got bezels on it to make sure that the finish of the bezel is consistent from one to the next, or if you've got like a flat black paint, same concept. I mean, flat can mean different things to different people depending on what you're looking at. So a lot of looking at things and just making sure that we're staying consistent.
Speaking on that board, when Dean took us over to the QA department, he was showing us that board with all the bezels zip tied up, and he said, that is the foundation. That is how we know that accuracy is where it needs to be. That there's not a different hue of blue for the anodization or the chrome or the flat black or anything like that. So
yeah, and I can from my personal experience, and I know Marc gets rolled into this a lot just because we've been here such a long time. We make any little change. I mean, hey, we're going to change the pointer here, or we're going to do this new artwork on this dial. Can you come and make sure that this still looks okay? And we reject stuff. I mean, all the time. If it doesn't look right, we say, go back to the drawing board, change this. The tick marks are in a different orientation than the previous artwork, or there's a hot spot in the lighting here. I mean, we're constantly, continuous improvement, just making sure that the things that we're producing are, built to the same standard every time that we build them. And, it's funny, you guys saw that board. I know, again, one of those examples where you can't see it, we're talking about it, but literally it's this, sheet of cardboard that's got bezels that are just, rigged up to it so that the QA team can look at it and make sure that those things are consistent. But yet you got to do those things to make sure that when you're producing things, and that's how we get the reputation that we have, that things are made well, they're made well the first time. And, if we don't get it right, we're certainly going to fix it for you. And Marc's a good testament to that. He answers the phones. I'm sure he's helping all those customers that ever have any of those issues for sure.
Well, Marc, since you are the one answering the phones and you said you've been here longer,
months.
Tell me, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen since you started here?
Definitely the manufacturing process, the technology. To be honest with you, with the advent of, I know this is going to sound old, the interwebs, the customers that actually call us now are much more educated than they have been in the past. So when I first started, people would call up and say, I have this vehicle. What would you suggest to put in this vehicle? And I would, well, it's a matter of personal preference, but this kind of looks like this or whatever. Now the customers when talking to them on the phone, they call up and say, I have this vehicle. This is what I want to put in it. And they have specific questions to the products that they want to put in the vehicle itself, unlike general questions that they used to have in the past. So the customer and the end user is much more educated than they were in the past. And I will be brutally honest with you, I have probably learned more from working shows, answering the phone. I have probably learned more from our customers than they've ever learned from me. They're so educated. They're the ones that are putting the hands on the vehicles. And that's a nice part about it. Hey, I bought this product. I have this type of vehicle. This is I'm having a little bit of a fitment issue, or putting some sort of a adapter for this, this thread size to this thread size, is this something you guys make, or a suggestion on something like that. So I would say the education of the customers has come a long way. And I think that has to do with, I have a 2000 Ford F-250, and I remember I had to put lock regulators, the power lock regulators in it. I got on YouTube. It literally took me like 5 minutes on each side. That there was one bolt that was like that was hidden in the door panel that I never would have found. I would have been yanking on the thing forever. But you go to YouTube, you can look that stuff up. They show exactly how to do it, and I think that's where the biggest changes come.
I would say, we're talking interwebs, right? But it's YouTube.
Yes,
YouTube, it's
100%.
Influencers, it's the install how-tos. That's a big thing that Paul and I deal with over at our shop. But I can see firsthand watching a drag racer that I like to watch on YouTube, and they're installing Auto Meter gauges, and they have a cobalt gauge, or they have, whatever that gauge may be. I got to have that now. Right? Or, I never thought of monitoring, exhaust gas temps or coolant temps, or I never thought of mounting a gauge in this specific area to make your job easier. Now they're calling in, asking a consultative question. And you're just like, yep, here you go. This is what you need.
Well, I never, until we had people come to us, who would have ever thought we'd make some sort of an exhaust back pressure gauge?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that would have never been on any of our radar until we had enough people calling in and asking at the shows.
Particle trap kit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just never would have thought that we would have came out with those kind of things without feedback from the industry.
Correct. Absolutely correct.
Mike, what do you think's your guys' most popular gauge?
Well, I think, honestly, Envision is become the most popular. I know it's not a gauge in the sense that it's, a round thing that monitors one device. I mean, it's obviously a multi-system, but, I've said it a couple times, but in my 20 years here, I've seen a lot of products that we've launched. I mean, we've had a lot of really cool. Elite was a really cool launch that we did. Although it's not around anymore, Nexus was unique. But as far as kind of like, you use like baseball terms to describe like, oh yeah, this product was a single or it was a double, depending on how good it was. But yeah, my analogy for Envision, I mean, home run. I mean,
I would say grand slam.
Yeah, grand slam. You can even throw that in there. I'm a little hesitant to kind of toot our own horn or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I mean, far and away, Envision is just blowing us away. I mean, we thought it was going to be cool. We thought it was going to do well. But just, the amount of units that we sell on, to the consumer, it's $1,000+ part. I mean, but for the amount of units that we sell, I mean, man, it's without a doubt grand slam, home run, whatever term you want to throw in there, and continuing to grow for sure.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's surprising to me because it is awesome. We got a chance to get our hands on it over here, Chris, and yeah, the easy to use joystick control on it, so not having to put your fingerprints all over it. That's one thing that I never liked about touchscreen personally. So I like that idea. I think that's really, really nifty. One of the things that I think I was most surprised to learn today was about the battery testing and that
best kept secret,
that style of product line. It's not something that I ever knew you guys had or was available or was done with Auto Meter. I guess it never clicked for me. Who wants to talk a little bit about that?
I suppose neither of us are really like qualified in that sense, but I mean, we're I'm director of instrumentation sales and Marc's, sales or director of motorsports. I'm sorry. And so our specialty is the instrumentation side of the business, but certainly we dabble on that side. But yeah, it's no joke. It's kind of the best kept secret about Auto Meter. I mean, you go into any AutoZone store, you go into any O'Reilly store, you go in there and you say, hey, I think my battery's bad, or I think, my alternator's not working. When they come out and test your vehicle, they're using our equipment to do that. So literally every single AutoZone, every O'Reilly, you go in there with whatever issue, battery, alternator, starter, our test equipment goes out to the vehicle and does that full system diagnostic. So, and what makes our test equipment different from, a lot of the competition that's out there is the way that we conduct our battery testing. So we actually have anywhere from a 40 to 120 amp load that's built directly into the test device. So when you go into the vehicle, you're dumping that load straight onto the battery. So instead of a simulated load, like, oh, I'm going to turn my fan on, I'm going to turn my radio on, the wipers, whatever, to put a minimal amount of load on that battery, ours is actually simulating real driving conditions. And what that ultimately does is it gives you a more accurate battery test. So when you do those conductance testing, a lot of times you'll get a situation where it gives you a false reading, whether it's a false reading on a good battery or a false reading on a bad battery, neither of which you want to be in. But yeah, those test equipment products, I mean, they help our customers. If you're a job or shop, you're doing any kind of work on people's vehicles, if you're selling batteries or doing any kind of that work, you can actually use our battery test equipment to do two things. One is to make yourself more profitable because you can sell more batteries. So you'd be surprised. I think it's like 1 of every 3 batteries on the road today is actually near end of life. So a lot of people, and especially in our area in Illinois, you get into those colder months, you might be on that edge of end of life and then poof, your battery goes bad. Well, our battery testers are going to be able to, detect whether that battery is good or bad more accurately than our competition does because of the way that we conduct our testing. So one, you can make money by selling more batteries. Customer comes in, hey, let me check your battery out. Oh, here's a slip. Let me tear it off, show you your result of exactly what the condition is. And then 2, it reduces warranty claims. So as the shop, you're kind of on the hook for, whenever you get that customer that comes back, oh, you sold me this battery, it's defective, and then you got to replace it. So you're out either the labor or, the cost to send that battery back to get replaced. So with those more accurate battery tests, you're able to reduce warranties and then, like I said, ultimately sell more batteries too.
Well, that's another thing that's evolved since Mike and I both got here.
Yeah, big time.
So when we first got here, the testers usually, they were a carbon pile that had a knob on it that you turned to increase the load. And then we went to a membrane switch type of tester. And now we have tablet type of testers. And the one thing about the testers that we have now is literally the ease of use. It literally will tell you if you hooked it up backwards. It has a step-by-step instruction to say, put this here, and it literally asks for the temperature outside.
CCA on the battery.
Yeah, you can read the label, put all of that stuff in it, and it has step-by-step instructions on how to use the unit as you go through the battery test. Another thing Mike didn't touch on either is in a large network, the battery testers will actually upload via the internet and let all the manufacturers know that this battery, you see them on now, you see each one of them has a barcode on them. They actually can go out and scan that. That stores the serial number of the battery and will actually upload it and tell exactly what test was run and what condition the battery was in.
Store by store.
So
I mean, literally,
cool.
you can aggregate testing data. So if you're, whatever that chain store is, you've got 5 stores or 5,000, it doesn't matter. You can look at, okay, how many battery tests were done in Illinois? How many batteries did we sell that day? How many warranties did we have? So these companies can use this data to find, ways to sell more or ways to market to people. I mean, all sorts of different things that, literally it's just done automatically. I mean, you go through that sequence and it just uses Wi-Fi to send that data to a hub. And then you can use our AmpNet software to kind of comb through all of that data and find those trends and things that you need to respond to do whatever it is that you need to do.
It's a battery charger you could try to use, Paul.
You're giving me too much credit. Now, Marc, you deal with customers a little bit more directly here. So I guess this question is for you. What are some of the most frequently asked questions? Like what question have you heard 100 times a day for 20 years?
So the biggest thing, in probably you guys go through this all the time too. The biggest thing that we have is ground issues. So the pyrometers, people don't understand what pyrometers, how they work. So everybody thinks the K probe that goes into the exhaust is actually a resistive-based probe. It is not. It's actually 2 dissimilar metals that are put together, and as they heat up, they create millivoltage, and that millivoltage change as the temperature change. Millivoltage is a very, very fickle thing. So if you take one of our pyrometer gauges and ground it on, let's say, a metal beam under the dash or whatever, the millivoltage is a very, very weak signal. So when they go to use it, the gauge starts bouncing all over or it won't operate correctly at all. It's because the probe itself and the gauge are not sharing a common ground. So probably the biggest thing, especially dealing with the diesel guys, is a grounding issue. The best thing for our gauges is to ground them directly to the engine block or head of the vehicle. And honestly, that will fix probably 95% of the problems that people have.
Do you guys have issues with EGT probes, pyrometers lasting a long time? Do you get 5 years out of an EGT probe?
Yeah, it's bad for business, but yes, we do. The probes that we use for our EGT gauges are actually what we call a shielded probe. So you have an open probe that actually has an exposed tip on it, and then our particular gauges all come with a shielded probe. And the plus to that is it lasts a little bit longer, and it also, if that tip ever breaks off, it does not go through the turbocharger. That's the reason we started using the actual enclosed shield tips. And another big thing we get is, should I mount the probe pre-turbo or post-turbo? Obviously, mounting it pre-turbo will give you the most accurate reading, but then you have to worry about shavings and stuff like that. And what I tell the customer, I said it's relative. You get a truck, you start driving it, whether you have it pre or post turbo, you get used to it running at a certain temperature. When you're on the gas, or diesel at this time, but on the accelerator, the temperature is going to go up, but it's going to stabilize and then come back down. I said it's all relative, so you need to get used to whatever that temperature is, and then if you start seeing rising from there at your relative temperature, then you know something's going wrong. So that's one of the biggest things that we get is ground issues and pre or post turbo. And they ask me, well, what temperature should my gauge run at? I'm like, I'm not a tuner. I can tell you how the gauge works, but I don't want to give you any false information on that.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that, because I feel like in the OEMs, you're starting to see a lot of OEMs. They run EGT probes, but they're always post turbocharger, so you're not getting as much heat or abuse for the probe to potentially last longer. Now, from a tuning perspective, what we do, we always say right into the manifold, because we want the truest reading possible. And usually a threshold's around 1350 sustained, right? You could have a peak up and come back down, but that 1350 is kind of where that happy medium, so to speak, is. But I never thought about that as far as the aftermarket probes go, because we've dealt with them in the past. EGT probes burn up, you have to swap them out. But when they're in the manifold, they're getting the hottest reading possible. So
yes.
Put it in the downpipe, there's usually a few 100-degree, difference between, those two areas.
Yeah, and something else to kind of touch on with the EGTs is I think there's a strange expectation that they're accurate, extremely accurate at all temperature ranges. And so you'll get somebody that'll call in and be like, my gauge is reading, 100 degrees. It's like, okay, hey, let's take a step back. Like that type of instrument is actually designed to basically sacrifice low-end accuracy to gain high-end accuracy. Because what you're really concerned about is like what you said, those 13 to 1350 degrees. You want an accurate there. Who cares what it reads? I'm not that who cares, but it's irrelevant.
Who cares?
Right.
Who cares? Right. Seriously.
Yeah, it's irrelevant what the temperature is at the low end, but people will look at it and be like, oh my gosh, my gauge is already reading 100, but it's 30 degrees outside or whatever it is, whatever the reasoning is that they give for that. So
yeah, and I have to explain that they make a Type K, a low temperature Type K thermocouple, which we use like on our data acquisition, for air temperature, intake temperature, and stuff like that. And then I do believe the cutoff, it's like 0 to 400, and then 400 and above is what it is. So yeah, I'll get people that'll call, well, when I turn it on, it reads 200. Well, like our particular pyrometers use a Type K thermocouple that is accurate from 400 degrees and above. So that is the good point on that, Mike.
Yeah. I mean, EGT probes. I mean, I think we have this level of almost disdain internally for EGT probes, because we do have EGT probes fail. We have always told people, post them on the manifold. That'll give us the most accurate reading. That's when we're talking about 1350 sustained. Like, you don't want to live at 1350 or above sustained, because you're going to start melting shit, right? Like, aluminum has a melting point. All the parts inside of your engine have a melting point. So running over that temperature is going to be dangerous. But now, as you mentioned, Chris, with all of the factory EGT probes, I mean, it's usually not just one EGT probe on a truck anymore. You usually have 3 to 4, and they all read different temperatures. So I like the idea that you're giving people of like, drive it for a week, watch the gauge. That will give you your baseline. It doesn't matter if you put it post turbo. It matters.
And that
if
goes
it
for
varies.
really any gauge. It could be a boost gauge or temperature gauge, pressure gauge. I mean, really having an instrument, the important thing is to learn about it. What's your normal? What is it in cold conditions? What is it after it's warmed up? What is it when you're driving hard? What is it when you're daily driving? And I mean, you got to kind of take mental notes, I guess, really is what it comes down to, and kind of study those patterns that you see. And then when it deviates from those things that you see, that's when you can actually use that instrument as the insurance policy that, that I talked about earlier.
No, you have a lot of guys, they'll spend a lot of money on gauges. We're all in this room. We all know what the stuff costs, but guys think that just because they have the instrument, they are now smarter. That's half of it. They now have to be observant. They now have to learn how the vehicle functions so that they can read those instruments accordingly to use them to their advantage.
Yeah, the gauge does you no good if you never look at it.
Way to be a buzzkill, guys. I just wanted some cool lights that look badass when people got in my truck.
Well, there is an element of that too. I mean, gauges are, aesthetically pleasing. I think that's a big part of our customer base, is people that just want something because it's got cool lights on it, it bounces around, does all sorts of different things.
They want that pillar, they want those gauges mounted.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, it was a status symbol when I remember coming in like 10 years ago to get into diesel trucks. It was a legitimate oh no, that truck's badass, it's got gauges. Because why would you put gauges on your truck if it was all stock? It was like they just went hand in hand with performance.
Yeah.
All right, guys, Mike, we'll start with you. What should I have asked you today that we have not talked about?
Oh gosh. Why am I so handsome?
No, that's obviously a lie. It's a good thing you're on radio or a podcast, buddy.
Audio medium. Although I will say, Dean said, No, you guys are going to go meet Mike. Don't worry that he looks half my age. He's been here longer than me.
Well, it's funny. We had our like celebratory 20-year thing like just a couple months ago, and I think he referred to me as he started here in elementary school. So yeah,
he said that to us. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Man, I don't know. Mark, if you have an answer to that, I mean, please feel free to jump in. I guess I wasn't ready for that one.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that we're continuing to advance our technology and just trying to continue to improve our products, improve the fitment of our products to certain vehicles, and we're just not going to stop. We're going to continually improve on our products is I think the biggest thing that we have.
Yeah, and if I could just kind of touch on that as well. I mean, we didn't get to talk about all of the diesel specific stuff that we make, but the diesel market to me, as I've kind of come through the company, I felt was a segment that we really listened to the customer. We came out with multiple products purely based on feedback from customers. It could have been a mounting solution. Our OBD2 splitter was, a problem solver product that we had. The diesel tack adapter, people griped about, I got no way to put this on my diesel. And then we did that. And then they're like, well, now you guys only have 10,000 RPM tacks. So then we released, lower RPM range tachometers. So, anytime we're kind of presented with an issue by a group of customers, obviously one guy complains, you can't, come out with a new product. But when you get consistent, comments about, hey, do you guys have a mount for this vehicle? Or can you do this way? Or, can you fix this? We take that to heart, and we may not get it right away, but, we always work to make sure that, our parts are quality. They're going to work for a long time. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I've gone to an event and somebody's like, yeah, I've got this, 30-year-old tachometer and it just won't break. I want to replace it, but I can't. So that's the mentality. That's what I love to hear. That's what we're all about is making stuff right the first time. And then if we don't get it right, making sure we service them right that first time. So
it's really cool to know too, like, for me personally, dealt with Auto Meter in the past, years past, and it's crazy to think that, where your shop is in your facility, it's only like 45 minutes from where we're at in Woodstock, Illinois. So you're basically in our backyards and we didn't even know it.
We wouldn't think of Illinois as like a high performance central for people that make stuff like that. But when you really start digging deeper, there are a lot of performance companies in Illinois, which is really cool.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much for carving out so much time for us. We definitely appreciate it. Listeners, this has been a great episode. I know you guys are going to love it. Jump on over to autometer.com. Check out all of their amazing diesel products that will fit your trucks. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. Come back next week. We're going to be talking to Jason Worley and crew over at WC Fab, who's actually just right down the street from you guys.
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. For today, this has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Ehmke.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today, guys. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Ehmke.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
It's a battery charger you could try to use, Paul.
You're giving me too much credit.